Welcome to Real Health with me, Karl Henry. Folks, losing someone close to us is one of the hardest things someone has to go through in life. But what lessons can be learned from a life interacting with the bereaved? In his new book, A Life Among the Dead, funeral director David McGowan delves into life after a loved one leaves us. David joins me now. David, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm not too bad now, and thanks for having me.
We're delighted to have you on. This is a fascinating topic. We have to start with the book and what made you write the book. Tell us a little bit more.
I'm in the funeral business, right? I spent most of my life in it. I think the first time I touched a deceased person, I was 14 years of age. So I suppose I spent my entire life around deceased people and bereaved people. So you don't spend that 40 years around those situations or among those people without learning things. So the one thing that I know of and is sure of and is certain of is we will leave this planet. And you and all the listeners and everybody on this planet will also leave. The one thing we're certain about is death. But it's strange that we don't talk about it. And I'm of the opinion, if you don't talk about something, you'll always have a fear of it. And why shouldn't we talk about the inevitable? If you're out in company tonight and you bring up death, people will find it awkward sitting beside you and listening to you. So the reason I said we need to be open about the inevitable. And that's what I did with the documentary. Now, I was a little bit afraid about that, putting out that documentary. I was afraid that 1,000 people would turn up at my door and say, "You never told us you did that to our granny." You know, so I was a little bit nervous about the whole thing. But I also knew in the back of my mind that we need to open up discussions about death. And that's what I did. And the documentary was a huge success. It's on Netflix now for the last 2 years. And you know yourself, if it's not been watched, it'll be taken down off Netflix. So that kind of spurred me to continue on bringing up the conversation about death. Because the things I've learned, I've studied psychology on death and dying in Chicago, right? So I know a little about it. Nobody knows it all. But things I have learned is the biggest loss any human being will ever experience in your lifetime is the loss of a loved one. And people are very sensitive around that when they do lose them. The public needs to be sensitive to them. And we just need to start educating people about that all the therapeutic reasons why we grieve. I also learned from going over and back to America, at that time in the 80s, people were making a joke about our wake. They would call it's an excuse to have a drinking session. And that used to insult me because I came from a rural village of 300 people. And the wake was very important to them. So I started talking like this to the Americans and all the psychologists, like I'm having this talk with you now. And now they're writing differently. When it was explained all the therapeutic reasons behind a wake, I would tell them a wake with a body present is sad time, but it's a combination of tears, laughter, and telling stories. Now the psychologists are looking into it, and now they're writing, why do the Irish grieve better than anybody else in the world? Why do the people in England find it difficult to grieve? Because their loved ones are locked up in a fridge in a mortuary for 2 weeks after they die. We get the deceased back to the loved ones within 8 to 9 hours of them passing away in the hospital, because that's all the families are interested in. They're not interested in as much how old is your hearse? Is it a brand new hearse? Have you funeral home facilities? All they ask us is, when can we have Mammy back at the house? When can we have her son? That's all they're interested in. Take him home. And when they get home, that's when the grieving starts. But the way we do death in Ireland is totally unique to Irish people.
And yet we have you said it at the start, we have a fear of that though, don't we? So the grieving process is it's a therapeutic process. It's communal therapy, it's chat, it's laughter, it's stories, it's grieving together as a unit. And yet as a society, I think you're right that we do have a fear around death. And why do you think that is? What is it on a societal level that scares us so much?
I think it's the unknown. Where do we go? Who do we believe? What God we're praying to? Is there a God? The uncertainty of where we go after we pass, I think, brings on a lot of the fear. Now, in this book and the documentary, I had to sign off all royalties to that, as you probably know, if you make a documentary. So I didn't make a lot of money out of this, but I never done it for the money. I have 200 handwritten letters written by people who are probably dead now, because in the letters they told me they had a terminal illness. And they told me watching the documentary took the fear of dying out further. In the documentary, there's more in the book. In the documentary, I explained that I believe that the spiritual world is much greater than this one down here. I have told and given examples in the book of why I believe that. I've seen things happen at funerals that you couldn't say were coincidences.
You can't just leave us hanging with that with that statement. You got to tell us a little bit more.
I could have written, Karl, 5 books on all the stuff I've seen. You know, I've seen pictures falling off the wall where I placed the coffin. And I go and I apologise to the wife and say to her, you know, we must have moved the picture or whatever. Oh, I'll put it up. Don't put it up, she said, because he never liked it. And I said, he never liked it. No. Well, I said, it's after falling off the wall. Well, she said, it's hanging there 30 years. And no one touched that paper. Nobody. I see hearses stopping at the favourite places where people fished and no explanation why theirs. And then a grandson would tell you afterwards, Grandad always told me when he's going to church, he wants to stop there. Now, how does a brand new Mercedes hearse stop there? And never stopped after. And I went, so I think we do a lot of guard of honours here. Sports people come together and football teams, and it's an Irish thing as well. And that night, the brand new hearse stopped on the bridge. I was so embarrassed. I just didn't know if the ground opened up, it could have swallowed me. I mean, you have 1,000 people around you and your hearse breaks down. So the guard of honour was side by side. And I just said to them quietly, we were on the brow of the hill going towards the church. I said, lads, will you put your hand on the hearse there and just give it a slight push? And that's how the hearse ended up outside the door. I went back totally embarrassed, ashamed, didn't know what to say to the family. Came outside the door, the hearse started again, brought it to the garage the next day, couldn't find nothing wrong with it. Anyway, the family rang me a week later to come in and settle the account. I was so nervous meeting them, I didn't know how to apologise to them. I thought, well, maybe should I give them discount on the bill or, you know, for the hearse breaking down and all that. But as soon as they came upstairs and into my office, before I even opened my mouth, they put their arms around me and said, how did you know when to stop at Daddy's favourite place? So I didn't know. Now, how can you explain those things? And loads and loads and loads of more stuff like. Have
you ever seen anything that's scared you in that situation?
Yeah. I get a sense of, I get a feel of a spiritual presence in the house. I believe the spirit is around. You see, I did research, Karl. You learn an awful lot from old people. These are the people that didn't have Google or the internet or access, but they knew when the bad weather was coming in by the way the birds flew. Nature told them what was happening. They'd know when to put out the fertilizer. It's raining tomorrow. No good it'll be washed away down thing. The same people, when I started asking them about death, they told me that they felt the spiritual presence for 30 days after the death. Now, you heard of, we're predominantly Catholic tradition here, but they have in the Catholic tradition, they have what they call a month's mind mass. Mm-hmm. Nobody ever knew what month's mind mass was. But that stemmed from the old people. And that was a mass a month after the person died to release the spirit to wherever they were going. And I totally believe that. I think the spirit is very close around the time.
Can I ask you, how did you get into this in the first place? Where did it begin?
Well, it's a bit of it's a long-winded story, but I'll cut it short for you. I know we haven't much time. In 1974, my father bought a pub in a rural village, right? A shop, a pub, and at that time, a foot of a counter was as good as an acre of land. So the pub was a big thing to be in. And after he bought the pub, he went down to the back of the sheds one night and he opened the door a couple of days later and he seen a hearse inside the shed. He immediately went in and rang the solicitor. He said, I'm after opening the shed here and there's a hearse in it. He said, you want to take it out of it? You want to get it out of it? He said, give me a minute to come back. And he rang him back a minute. He said, he said, in rural Ireland, he said, businesses in villages usually took care of the funerals in the village. And the reason being is there'd be no point to a sheep farmer or a turf cutter doing a funeral business because he might be up in the bog and no phones and nothing when something is citizen had died. So they were usually attached to businesses that were already occupied and kept going. So my father bought such a business, but he didn't want to do the funeral. So anyway, the solicitor rang him back and he said, look, Martin John, you have no problem. He said, there's a nurse by the name of Nurse Roddy up the road, and she does all the laying out. There's a man over at the graveyard, he digs all the graves, and there's another man up there, and he does the driving of the hearses. So all you have to do is turn up with a coffin, a hearse, and 4 screws. And that's all you have to do, because the tradition in that building is going back over 100 years. So he did. But at the time, we were all helping out as kids in the bar. We were all told, go into the bar, pull pints at 14 years of age. And I was inside the bar doing my duty after coming from school, and my father walked in, he said, come on with me, we have to put somebody overboard. Now, I didn't know what overboard was, but I started to study it. Sometimes in the old roll houses, they used to take the door off and laid the person on it to dress them and wash them. But it wasn't that. I think it was the coffin is made of timber and you put the person overboard. But I went along anyway, and I was told to catch the feet and put him into the coffin with the rest of the lads. And I did that, and it didn't faze me. But what did faze me was bandages tied around his mouth and why his feet was tied. And of course, I asked my father, and he didn't know because he had no training either in this. And his answer to me was, ask the nurse there, she'll tell you. So from that day on, it spurred me to go and see if I could make this better for the bereaved.
And tell us, why did he have bandages on his feet and on his mouth?
Because, sometimes deceased people, because they didn't know the science behind it, they were known as a stiff. Like you have over 500 muscles in your body, and they have to keep lubricated at all times. There's several chemicals there, ATP, there's a load of stuff, you probably know more about it. And those have to be lubricated because those muscles are working constantly. And that fluid, when you die, coagulates, it clots. It's kind of like goes hard, and that causes the stiffness of the muscle. And we refer to it today as rigor mortis. So what happens there is, and the rigor mortis will usually happen about 3 to 4 hours after death. So what they do with the mouth, if the mouth was open when the person died, they would tie it with bandages before rigor mortis would set in, so it wouldn't open.
So everything stays in a fixed position and fixed.
Yeah. Basically, yeah. But now we know more. Like I train embalmers, we know more about the anatomy and physiology of the body now. So the science behind it, you don't have to put putting bandages or any of that stuff going on. But that's how they did it at the time. Like you know,
funerals really do help, don't they? They help us grieve together. It's that communal therapy when a loved one passes away, and it's such an important part of our culture, isn't it?
Yeah, like the book is not all about stories about. I mentioned a bit in it about how animals will sense grief quicker than humans. And I've shown I tell examples of that I've come across. But I also talk about grief, like you said. And grief is very complex. I didn't know, Karl, anything about grief till I went to America and studied it. And it's such, like, your brain is such a powerful tool. And I worked with neurosurgeons, and they used to be able to explain to me all the different diseases that the brain, tumors, Parkinson's, dopamine, everything. They were able to, it was fascinating. And then they would tell me how the brain, or try to tell me how the brain works. And I got a 10% of an insight into how that works. And that helped me understand grief. Grief is very complex and it's very dangerous. I do believe in all the stages of grief. I feel so sorry for people who have to start to grieve in sudden deaths, unexpected, untimely deaths, like murders or car crashes, or, their grief is so devastating. It could cause them illnesses. It can bring on anxiety. It can bring on depression. I do believe in the stages. You have to, people stay in the denial. Like, for instance, take the Stardust people. They never got an answer for 40 years. They were still stuck in the anger stage, and they have to get to the acceptance stage. But there's other stages there. There's denial, there's a whole, and you will go through all of those. And to have a healthy grief, you need to be helped through those stages. I see people, they grieve, some grieve privately and some grieve openly. And people shouldn't judge them after funerals. And I hear them being judged. Oh, so you see your man there, he never shed a tear over the funeral, so he didn't care. They're wrong. Like, that poor lad will grieve 3 months down the road on his own. These people grieved and there's 500 people around them. So you need to understand that. And I talk a good bit about that in the book. So grief is nothing to be mishandled.
The key lesson for you that you've learned is from listening to the conversation is that you live life for the short time that we're here. You live it to the max, and you try and reduce your stress levels and the things that you stress about.
Yeah, and why do people want to be the richest person in the graveyard? I don't get that. Because I bury a lot of people, and there's no towbear on my hearse. It's like, why they put so much stress and cause so much trouble over money? Like, to me, when a death comes around the house, it's a very dark place, and it puts life into perspective fairly fast. What are the important things in life? Why are we getting so wrecked and rose by simple things that have no consequence, no meaning at all? They're not going to do you any harm. I just don't understand that. Why is there so much wars in the country? Why are they murdering women and children? Is it power, greed? Where that comes from, I don't know, because you're only going to be on this planet for 78 years. From baby to your death is the average male is about 78. Like, why would you bother falling out with people? Why do you bring stress on yourself? Why don't you go away happy?
David, it's been wonderful to chat to you, to interview you, and to learn from you all the lessons that you've learned over the course of your amazing career. And we look forward to reading the book at some stage. A Life Among the Dead, funeral director David McGowan, thank you so much for joining us on today's episode of Real Health. I really hope you enjoyed today's episode of Real Health with me, Karl Henry. As ever, we are at Karl Henry PT on Instagram, realhealth@independent.ie, and on the Irish Independent website. Don't forget to rate and review and follow us as well for automatic podcast downloads. We'll see you next week for more Real Health. Slán go fóill.